The Newzroom murder trial you've just seen ended for the day. Now back 10 o'clock tomorrow. But also emerged that the Judicial Service Commission has now recommended that the judge in that case, Judge Tshifhiwa Maumela, be suspended. The JSE says he's had too many outstanding judgments. In other words, as I understand it, he simply hasn't delivered his judgments in cases before. He's heard the case, but hasn't actually handed down judgment. He has said that he's been ill. If he were suspended, there will then be an investigation into his conduct. Mbekezeli Benjamin is with Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, good afternoon to you. Firstly, it has happened, but it's still rare. How is a judge suspended? How does the process work?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and to the viewers. So how a judge is suspended is that there must be a recommendation from the JSC advising the president to place the judge on suspension. And usually that recommendation is preceded by an inquiry by the Judicial Conduct Committee, which will usually receive a complaint and the judge's response, and then they decide that it must go to the JSC. Then the JSC will do two things. One, they will appoint a tribunal to investigate the complaint, but secondly, they'll advise the president. The president will then take on the JSC's advice and will place the judge on suspension. Currently, there are about 3 judges on suspension at the moment. I don't recall a time when the president didn't follow the JSC's advice on suspending a judge. So that is, in a nutshell, how it happens.
We've got through quite a long conversation without talking about Judge John Tlhophe, but we'll come back to that later if we need to. Before he's suspended, does a judge get a chance to argue they should not be suspended?
Yes, so sometimes the president does call for the judge to make some representations on whether or not they should be placed on suspension. But often that doesn't happen, because what would usually happen is that the JSC will provide concrete reasons why they believe a judge should be suspended, and attached to the JSC's reasons is a report by the Judicial Conduct Committee which says that we've looked at the complaint that the judge is facing. We've determined that it is a serious complaint that might possibly lead to that judge's impeachment. And third, we believe that at this time it is important that the judge be on suspension while a tribunal investigates the full circumstances of the complaint. So it is quite an involved process, and by the time it gets to the president for his signature, it has gone some way in getting at least a sense of what the issues are and what the judge's response is.
So we saw, for example, and I mentioned Judge John Tlhophe because he was one of the first people, I think he was the second person that there was this whole inquiry into. That was a very long process before the JSC actually made a recommendation. That's how long it takes. There's a proper process up for this.
Yes, so there is a process that is outlined in terms of the Judicial Service Commission Act. And that process, you're quite right, it is quite involved. It has multiple stages, and usually the suspension is only the beginning, right? Because after the president confirms the suspension and sets the date from when the suspension starts, then the tribunal is the one that follows. And the tribunal is the one where there is a panel of usually 3 members, and there's the judge on one side, and there's an evidence leader who's a senior prosecutor. They go into an inquiry and investigate the full circumstances of the complaint, and then only after is there a recommendation to the JSC of whether the judge is guilty of gross misconduct or incapacity or incompetence. And then once the JSC receives that Judicial Conduct Tribunal report, it is then that they decide whether the judge should be impeached or not. So it is quite an involved process. And there's good reason for that. That's because it shouldn't be easy to remove a judge from office in any constitutional democracy, because what you would end up having is that when judges make judgments that are not favorable towards a particular side, usually the powerful in politics or business, usually they would want to get the judge removed. So the process of removing a judge is complex to protect judicial independence.
Have we ever had a judge suspended for this before, for simply not doing their work, delivering judgments?
No, we haven't had judges that were suspended for not delivering judgments before. There were 2-3 judges in the past who faced the Judicial Conduct Tribunal for not delivering judgments, but they were already on retirement. So they were already retired, and they were called back to say, you haven't done this work. You need to account for it. But this situation is unique now because the 2 judges implicated are sitting judges. They still have quite a bit of time before they retire. And so this suspension means that they may not take on new work as sitting judges. They need to finalize the cases that are before them. But it's certainly in the past, judges have faced a conduct tribunal before.
Okay, so now the million-dollar question after all of that. If Judge Maumela is suspended, what on earth happens to the case, the Meyiwa murder trial?
So Judge Maumela has already heard the evidence in this case. He's already had the witnesses testify, including today. So it would be extremely disruptive to remove him from the case and get a new judge who will deal with the case and restart the whole process. So usually the condition that is placed for judges who are on suspension is that they continue to deal with the cases that they have already started, but they may not take on any new cases from the date of the suspension. So, for example, the president will set 1 June as the date from when the suspension kicks off, and from 1 June, he may deal with the Meyiwa trial, but he can't deal with any other work.
Mbekezeli, I mean, the credibility of the entire justice system, once again, will be on trial with a case like this. And for that to happen, I mean, we'll all be watching it. For it to be presided over by a judge who's formally being suspended, I mean, it's a little bit absurd, isn't it?
Well, look, it's not a good picture, Stephen, but it's not absurd as it looks, because what Judge Maumela is being suspended for is not delivering judgments, and he's already given some reason to say that it may relate to his health. The Judicial Conduct Tribunal will go into further detail on why exactly the judge was not able to deliver the judgment. It might very well relate to health. It might be more systemic problems in the Gauteng High Court. We already know that court has a very heavy workload. The judges are overburdened. There are not enough judges to begin with. There are not enough researchers to assist the judges. So there might be systemic problems that led to him not delivering judgments. So this process is not necessarily a reflection on his credibility and his individual capacity to work as a judge. There might be more systemic issues. So this investigation is to get at that. And so at this point, the credibility of the justice system is not under question. There might very well be good reasons why the judge was not able to deliver judgments. So at this point, I think he can still discharge his responsibilities as a judge presiding over the Meyiwa trial. And until the Judicial Conduct Tribunal makes its finding, I think we should also suspend our judgment.
Mbekezeli Benjamin, thank you from Judges Matter. Do appreciate the time. Well, from the courts and judges back to politics, a 3-hour court